Hello, welcome to our webinar. Today's webinar is Workspace Authoring 101, Feature Caching. Hi, my name is Dave Campanis. I'm an applications expert here at Safe Software. My job is basically helping people create the workspaces they need to get the problem solved that they're running into. Okay, what we're going to be covering today is why feature caching is good, all the cool things it can do for you. But we're also going to cover the scenarios where feature caching is not the best thing you should be using, and you might want to turn that off. We do have a live team standing by to answer your questions, any QA questions or questions you might have. So please fire in the questions as you're watching this webinar, and we'll answer them to the best of our abilities. Okay, what is feature caching? Feature caching is this option in FME Workbench where as you run the workspace, it stores a copy of the features at each step of the way, at each transformer in the stream. And this is kind of nifty because once we've stored this data, you can do things like just click on the transformer and see the results of the output at that particular state in the visual preview window, which is nice from flipping back and forth so you can see the results of your logic. We also let you run only a part of the workspace. So if you've just got a section you're working on, you can just sort of run that part over and over and over again and say not hit the original data set all the time, which should save you some time. Just one other note that the feature caching only applies when you're working in Workbench. Once you've saved the workspace and you upload it to FME Server, or you run it in Quick Translator or in command line, none of the overhead of the feature caching will occur. So you don't necessarily have to turn it off before you save. You can leave it always on in Workbench if you want. And I believe that when you first install FME, it's on by default. Okay, on to the demos. Here we have a fairly simple workspace. For those of you not familiar with FME, this is where we create the processes used for the data conversions. Normally we have a reader and a writer, and we have these transformers here that do the operations. In this case, I'm just creating a trigger feature. Then I'm using that trigger feature to create an HTTP call where I'm accessing some road event data at a remote website, and I'm getting the results back in JSON. And then I have a JSON fragmenter, which breaks up those results into individual features. And finally, I have a transformer that takes the geometry in the JSON and creates it to real geometry. Now, first thing we want to do is turn the feature caching on. Now, when FME is installed on your computer, by default it is turned on, but in case it isn't, you just go under the Run button here and turn on feature caching. The other thing you want to have with the feature caching is the visual preview window. You can get that through the View Windows Visual Preview setting from the menu there. This allows us to see the results of the feature caching each of these steps. It's kind of a built-in alternative to the Data Inspector for those of you familiar with FME. So let's quickly run this workspace to build up the caches. Yeah, it'll take about a minute or so, or maybe less. Most of which is going out and getting the information from the website. Okay, so there we go. The feature caches are all filled. If we switch over to the visual preview window again, and we click on the creator, we see nothing. That's our basic trigger feature. Click on the HTTP caller, we see the response that we've gotten from the website. It's a whole whack of JSON here. And if we click on the JSON fragmenter, we see that we've broken that up into features. And then finally, at the geometry extractor, we see that we have geometry that we've extracted from the features as well. So now we've got proper geometric feature we can overlay on a map. So that's a cool thing. You can see all the information. You see both the attribute information and the geometry if there is there. Now, one thing you notice, if we try to run this workspace again, the run is grayed out, and that's because our caches are all full. So running wouldn't give us anything extra. Now, in the case of when you're reading from data where the data itself might change, we also give you the option to rerun entire workspace. So if you haven't changed any workspace, but you've changed the data and you want to see the updated data, that you can pick this option to rerun the entire workspace. Now, if we change any of the parameters within the transformers here, so in this one, I will change it to 105 events instead of 100 on the URL. You'll notice that all of the little caching symbols here go yellow. And this is just to tell you that this is a stale cache. So if we click on the transformers, the caches are still there. We can still see them. But the yellow comes up to tell you that, hey, these are stale. These have not been updated. And if we run this again, the run workspace becomes available again. We'll quickly run this again, and we see that all our caches have been refreshed now. Right? We have 105 features instead of the 100 we had before. Up until now, we've let Workbench determine how much of the workspace to run, but we can also choose to run only portions of the workspace. We click on any of these transformers, we see that we have two icons. One is run to this, and the other is run from this. Now, in this case, we're getting our data from HTTP caller, where we're accessing a public website. Now, some of these websites might have limits on how many times you can hit it, or maybe you just don't want to keep hammering the website all the time. So what you can do is run to this transformer. There we go. And this has filled up the cache here. And now, if you make any changes to this part of the workspace, all you simply do is go run from this. And this will run this part of the workspace from this transformer, from the cache data, instead of always going back to the HTTP caller, or also if you're talking to a spatial database that you don't want to wait for, etc. Now, as your workspace gets larger, you might find that there are sections of the workspace you don't always want to have cached, just because it's taking up a lot of room. And I believe there's a absolute limit of number of file handles we're allowed to have open on the cache. So if you've got a really big workspace, you probably want to turn off the caching in certain sections of it. And the way to do that is to put a bookmark around the sections that you want to turn the caching off, and then just collapse it. And once you've collapsed the bookmark, and we're going to rerun this entire workspace just to flush all the caches. There we go. We'll see that we have a cache on the output of the bookmark, but if we open the bookmark back up again, we'll notice the HTTP caller was not cached. So all of the transformers inside the collapsed bookmark will not have caches built, and there'll just be a single cache on the output for you. Okay, the next really neat thing, and this is my favorite thing about feature caching, is you notice if we click on the JSON fragmenter here, it's got about 5 attributes here. But if we bring up the feature information window and then click on one of the features, we see that there are actually quite a number of attributes on the features. And this is a sort of a difference between what the Workbench knows about the data coming through and then what's actually on it. Now, in this case, Workbench, it doesn't see the JSON that we're downloading, or it hasn't seen yet, because this is grabbed at runtime. So it doesn't know what it's going to be extracting from that JSON. So it just has the attributes here that it knows are on the feature and doesn't expose the rest. Now, in transformers that do this, like the JSON fragmenter or the XML tools or SQL creators, etc., we'll usually have a little section at the bottom that says attributes to expose. And this allows you to sort of expose the attributes that you know are going to be on there from the data. However, it usually takes a lot of typing, and it's kind of a bit of a pain. So we want to do it. Even if you like cutting and pasting from here, it still takes a while. Well, the cool new feature we have in FME is we can add an attribute exposer transformer, which also lets you expose the attributes manually, but we can do import from feature cache. So it's going to look at that feature cache, it's going to look at all the attributes on those features, and it's going to allow us to select them all and just import them. And if we go OK, and notice that now we have all of these attributes that are shown here are exposed on the feature and usable to FME, or usable to you when you're setting up your processes in FME. So I'm just going to run to here to fill up this cache on this transformer as well. Okay, there we go. And the other thing we can do with feature cache information is we can use to look at the values of those attributes instead of just the name. So if we add a tester in, and we say test one of these attributes, let's take event type, and then we look at the right value we're going to test equals, we have the cached values. Now these are all of the values for that attribute that we've found in our data set. So instead of looking through all of them and figuring out what's all there, they're all right here. So we want to test is this equal to construction, and go OK. And again, we can just, if we want, we can run to this to fill this cache up. The next cool thing about feature caches is if you're having a problem with your workspace, setting up the logic and stuff, we have an online community where you can ask people for help. But when you ask people for help with your workspace, a lot of times they want to see your workspace, and it's also handy that if they had a copy of your sample data. But if you're reading from a database or in this case an HTTP site that's not public, or if your data is somehow sensitive, you don't want to send people your data set. But what you can do is you can, instead of sending the workspace, you can create by Workspace Template. So you hit the File Save as Template, and there's an option in the template where include the feature caches. So if you include the feature caches, you're actually including all the cache data with the template. So if we do that, and then we look at the template we just created, open that up in Workbench, we'll see that this is the template open, but all our caches are all pre-populated as they were in the workspace we saved them out as. So now the people are trying to help you fix your workspace issue, they've got a sample of the data they can run and add some more information downstream and sort of test it out for you. Also, if you send it to a support crew, they're also really happy about that as well. Now, again, if the data is sensitive, one of the things you could do is add a couple of transformers that will say anonymize your data. So you could just put in an offsetter, say to move it, hundreds of thousands of meters from where it really is. Or you could use an attribute renamer to rename sensitive attributes, or you can remove, say, sensitive attributes that are not necessarily for your logic. You could wrap all those transformers up inside the bookmark here, collapse the bookmark, and you probably, if you'd have a reader, you'd also want to add that into the bookmark as well. And then create your caches and then save it as a template. So you only cache the anonymized data. So people are working with your anonymized data, can help you out, and then when they send it back to you, you're all ready to go with your own data. So that's all the cool things about feature caching. Basically, feature caching can help you speed up your workspace development by not having to constantly read the data. You can just run parts of your workspace. There's all the tools I've showed you where you can just work on sections at a time, and make it a lot easier for you. And also exposing all the attributes that are in the data itself. That, to me, that's the biggest thing of all. We recently had a project where we were migrating over our community pages from one system to another, and we used FME in-house to do that. And our team that did that said they just couldn't have done that without feature caching. So it is a lot of help. Now, that being said, there are a few areas where we don't want to use feature caching. First of all is raster workflows. If you're working with rasters, the issue is that rasters are very large data sets. And the feature caching will create a copy of that raster at each step along the way. So you're going to end up with a lot of data being written to disk, which takes up both time and disk space. So if you have rasters, you probably want to turn it off. The other thing about rasters is that when FME does raster processing, we perform a sort of optimization on the logic you've set up to do as few operations as possible, and we sort of run it backwards to find out how much of your input image is needed for the output image, and then we only read that. So if you're using things like clippers and stuff in your raster processing, we will optimize that to take the least amount of time to do the process. If you turn on feature caching, that kind of messes with that. Again, we're writing complete copies of the raster at each step, so that'll really slow things down. When you're working with rasters, you can either disable feature caching altogether, or if you've got kind of a mixed vector raster process going on, you can put all the raster processing in a bookmark and collapse that. The second area where feature caching can cause problems is if you're using variables. Now, variables are quite cool, and I use them a lot. The variable setter, variable retriever, just puts a variable up in memory. But the key thing is it puts it up in memory. Now, you can use these variable setters to make dictionaries of values where multiple parts of your workspace are referring to the same dictionary. Or you can use it if you know the order of your features coming in to extract some information from one set of features and place it on the other set of features without having to go through an actual feature merger, which can really improve the performance of your workspace. But again, the problem is these are stored in memory, and if you do a partial run of your workspace, the memory on the second run is not going to be there if the variable setter is not in the part that's being run. So you can run into problems there, that the variable state will be lost. So just be cognizant if you've got variables in there, you probably have to turn the feature caching off. And if feature caching is on, there'll actually be a nice warning in the log file just to remind you. And finally, there are some workflows where feature order is important. Like I said before, sometimes with the variables, feature order is important, but we also have transformers like the feature merger and the clipper, where we have these performance options that you can set clipper type clippers first, or in a feature merger, it's suppliers first. And that way you can set up your reader writers in a certain order so that you know that your supplier features comes first or your clipper features come first. And then a transformer itself only has to store one set of features into memory and not the other set. This can really improve your performance, but the problem is this order that you've set through the readers by organizing the readers isn't necessarily retained in the feature caching. And it really depends on sort of how far down the list the caches are and what's between them and how it's read. So if there's any workflows where feature order is important, it would probably be a good idea to turn the caching off. Okay, that wraps it up pretty much. That's there's more information on the feature caching with more details at we have an FME Evangelist blog on it with some more examples. I think we'll be sending out that link through the chat window. Yeah, so the summary is basically feature caching can help you develop your workspace a lot faster. It's got a lot of tools, the partial runs, the being able to click instantly see on the information from each transformer. Again, being able to save the caches out when you create a template so you can send your data to other people easily. But there's a few places where you don't want to use feature caching for performance. If you don't have FME yet, you want to try it out yourself because, hey, this looks really cool. You can get a free download of FME, a trial version. I think we'll have that. We'll post the link a little bit later. The workspace from this webinar, which is fairly simple, but it's nice to play with, will also be available on the webinar page. And yeah, you can play around with it for free, all you like. And that's it. Yeah, here's the link for the free trial of FME at the bottom there. And thank you for your time.